Greetings and welcome to the inaugural episode of Friday Night Writes. I am so excited to be doing this. I am Beck Lieber, your host for these wonderful writing events that we're going to be doing every Friday. So tonight is the first episode, and I've been planning this for a month, and the universe has conspired in every way possible to try to find ways to make this not happen. I woke up with a cold this morning. I've been fighting respiratory issues for like a month. I had to just run to Walgreens to pick up a prescription that was called in for me at 6:30, and the show was starting at 7, and I was running around like a crazy person trying to get all of this taken care of. But I'm here, and I've got my tea, and we are ready to do this. So I am so excited. I haven't streamed since like 2016, something like that. I used to be part of a show called Drink Shares, which was under the umbrella of Ink Shares. Unofficially, we were all part of writers at a website called Inkshares, where we were trying to crowdfund our books as beginning projects and things like that. But I am really excited to be back in front of people again and talking about writing and talking about books and other nerddom and things like that. So the only problem is because I have not been feeling great, I'm a little worried. There may be some times I have to like dab my nose because I have a runny nose, and I'm feeling pretty hoarse. I've got my tea though, so I'm good. But I might have to take a couple of breaks just because I'm a little winded and I'm having some respiratory issues. So I already feel like I want to hack and cough, and then I just sprinted a mile. But let's try to do this because I've been planning for a month. So if you have already seen my special bonus episode, as I call it, last week I did a little bit of a preparation in a secret bonus show, I joke, just to make sure all my junk was working, to make sure that my audio was working and my video was working and that my transitions were going to work. So everything went really well, and if you were one of the 5 people that popped in to watch me and you're back tonight, that's awesome. Thanks for tuning in again. If you're not, I'll go through the preliminary obligatory things that I should talk about in my first episode, like why we're here tonight and what we're doing and what the show's going to be about and who the hell am I and why am I talking. So I am going to be working from a script tonight just because it's been really hard for me to stay focused. I have not been sleeping well. I've been having all of these issues because of this stupid cold that will not go away and these nagging respiratory issues I've been having since before Christmas that just seem to pop out of nowhere. So I'm going to pull up my notes really quickly, just so I am fully prepared. So if you see me staring blankly off to the screen every once in a while, like just doing this like weird thing, it's just because I'm trying to look at my notes while I am streaming. When I did this years ago on Drink Shares, we worked in a team. So there was always like somebody talking to the camera while somebody else was working with the notes or running the chat. So I am a one-woman show these days. The other people that used to be part of Drink Shares eventually, thanks Timber's my mod for tonight. He's a good buddy of mine. So the other people that were part of my stream in 2016 on Drink Shares have moved on to other things in just life happening. Like one of them opened a shop, another one had like their 3rd kid, and another one had a major move, and so there's like a lot of life changes that were going on. And I'm still doing the same thing, lived in the same place, married to the same person. So my life is pretty stable and stagnant and boring. And so I'm able to be with you tonight doing this. But back in the day when we did Drink Shares, we had multiple people doing multiple things at once. So it's really hard to move to a completely different platform because I'm a complete noob to Twitch. We used to do ours through Google Hangouts via YouTube when you could still do that. So I'm learning Twitch as I go, watching a lot of YouTube videos, watching a lot of other streams to get ideas, trying to get everything set up best I can. But I'm a one-woman show, looking at my own notes, writing my own scripts, running my chat. You know, like I said, I do have a buddy of mine running mod tonight, so I'm not completely solo, but for the most part, what you see is what you get tonight. So just let me move over to where I want to start. So, who am I, and why am I talking about writing? I am not a published author, so what do I know about writing at all? Here's the thing. I have been studying writing for as long as I have been able to write. I have always loved writing stories. I've been writing stories since I was little, since I was old enough to understand the basic idea of a story itself. started with movies, and then I moved on to books, and eventually, with the golden age of television we're living in, and fan fiction, and video games, and senior year, I discovered a love for role-playing games, tabletop games, things like that. So I have a multifaceted love of story, and it has never left me. Now, by trade, by day, I'm a teacher. So naturally, I have this inclination to want to share the knowledge I've gained over the 12 or so years that I've been actively pursuing writing as a craft. Back sometime around 2008, I believe it was in conjunction with Twilight coming out, where everybody was just talking about what a great story and book this was, and all these girls were losing their mind over it, and I just didn't get it. I didn't get the appeal. So I tried watching it for like the first 20 minutes, and I noped right out of that. And I realized, hey, if this could be a story, well, hell, I could do that. I could write a story. And I kind of got the inspiration from my hatred of how much I did not like Twilight to be like, you know what, if this chick can write a story and it can be a worldwide phenomenon, so too can I. And from that point on, I actively started engaging in the craft of writing. I started going to workshops. I started reading as many books as I could get a hold of. Hey, there's Joe. Joe just walked in. Oh, that's so great. Joe is a former member of our old show on DrinkShare, so it is so awesome to have him with me tonight. Now I feel a little nervous because now I feel like I'm going to be judged on the quality that we were used to with having 4 people running a show. So, Joy Bathrobe, I'm so glad you are with us tonight. Sorry, moving on back to what I was saying. Like I said, I've been going to workshops, watching YouTube, going to seminars, taking online classes, going to like in-class brick and mortar schools, taking classes, studying story in all the different forms that I can, whether it's movies, video games, television, books, what have you. I have actively been pursuing this craft since 2008, but I've been writing stories since I was little. I could go behind me on this wall of nerddom and start pulling out all of my notebooks that I haven't torched out of embarrassment, that I've actually kept. In fact, there is a little book over there that I wrote in 4th grade. It was the first story I ever wrote, because my teacher in 4th grade wanted us to learn the basic idea of what a story was. And we all got to write our own story, and I wrote my first fantasy story when I was, 8 years old or whatever. It was awful, and I won't let anybody actually read it because it's that embarrassing. But that started my love of story. And all through middle school, I was very Tina Belcher. I had notebooks filled with stories, and they were, before I knew what fan fiction was, they were truly fan fiction stories. Like on Bob's Burgers, she writes, characters tended to be based on my friends or my crushes, and they were always involving a story that I was obsessed with at the time. So whatever movie I was into at the time or whatever book I was reading at the time was very much coloring my creative writing at the time. So sorry, I didn't see who that was because I have my notes up in front of it. A trainer, thank you. Thank you for following. Enjoy those cool points. So stories have always been a major part of my life, but like every responsible adult, you look at the thing you love and say, I know that's not going to make me money. So I went to school. I became a teacher. I teach full-time. I teach regular ed, social studies, and special ed where I teach English. So for the last couple of years, in the 4 years I've been a special ed teacher, I've had to go back and I've really had to analyze story because I teach my kids the breakdown of story. We talk about plot. We talk about setting. We talk about character development. All of the things that go into a story we talk about. And it really got me back to thinking of, I wish I could be focusing on that. Like if I could teach writing all day, that would be amazing. So when 2020 came around, I really started thinking, man, I want to go back to this. I haven't been with my crew on DrinkShares in 4 years now. And I have a writing website where we do a lot of articles and things like that talking about the, excuse me, I apologize. As I said, fighting a cold. So I know that's gross, but it's better than drippage in the video. So basically, wanting to go back and focus on the things that I love about teaching while also focusing on my love of writing. And as much as I love the website, independinc.com, it's hard to run with one person, so I kind of fell off the boat with that. And I wasn't really getting the engagement I was hoping I was going to get on the website, so I decided 2020, I needed a fresh start. I needed to get back to my passion, and I kind of needed some accountability, because in the 12 years I've been focusing on my craft, I've never actually finished a story. And it really got me thinking about why I started the writing website in the first place. And it was that I wanted to reach out to other authors and try to figure out what it is that happens after you've been writing for a while. You're no longer a newbie. You have the mechanics down. You understand the basics of story structure, of plotting and outlining and character development, and you've read books, you've gone to seminars, you've done the work, but you're still struggling to get pen on paper or words on a Word doc. And you kind of fall into this weird gray area where you're not a new writer anymore, but you haven't published anything yet. So you go through this weird denial that I'm not truly a writer. Well, here's the thing. If you write, you're a writer. Maybe you're not a published author, but you're a writer. And that is an important distinction. So the first thing we're going to do tonight is we're going to admit we are writers. We love writing. We are active writers. Whether or not we're published or not, we are all writers. If you put words down on paper or into a Word doc, you are a writer. Neil Gaiman says that it is the easiest and hardest thing to do. You just sit there and you put one word after another until you have sentences, and then sentences become paragraphs, and you do it till you're done. And it's the easiest and the hardest thing you'll ever do. So if you're actively writing, congratulations, you are a writer. You don't need any special permission. You don't need a person to come in and say, congratulations, you're a writer. You already are. Now, maybe you don't have the published author status. So what? Who cares? You're a writer. And that's the first thing you have to admit. So, excuse me. The problem is everybody and their brother and their cat has a website, a YouTube channel, a book that reaches out to these newbie writers. Okay, it teaches you the basic mechanics. But what about somebody like me who's been doing it for 12 years and I'm still struggling? It's not that I can't write a story. It's not that I don't know how to write a story. There's something I'm missing, and I haven't been able to figure out what it was until I realized I am not enough to keep myself motivated. Writing is a very isolating, by yourself, introverted, inside thing. And without the ability to reach out and connect with others, you don't understand why you're doing it. You lose the reason why you're doing it. Because my motivation for writing is I want to be your favorite writer. I want to be the author of your favorite book someday. But how do I know I'm doing it right? How do I know my story is even worthwhile? Because sitting on the couch while I'm trying to write, pulling up YouTube on my smart TV to listen to some epic music, when the words don't come, well, why not quit? Nobody's holding me accountable. Nobody's waiting for my next chapter. Nobody's waiting for my next book to come out. So the motivation really falls away when you are writing to an audience of one. So naturally, I've reached out to people in writing communities. I've joined umpteen of them through various websites, and when I was involved with Inkshares and creating these writing communities with people. And I started to realize over time, people in writing communities tend to join writing communities for one specific reason, and it's to market themselves to other writers. We know that as writers, we are also readers. We would not be writing books if we did not love reading books. And the sad truth is, the longer I'm involved with the various writing communities that I've tried to be a part of, the more I realize that people tend to join writing communities not to actually be part of a community, but it's because they have a captive audience for marketing, to reach out to beta readers or to buy their book or to just talk about writing. And so the problem with that is when I read for you, I'll beta read, I'll buy your book, I'll help you work out a problem when you have an obstacle. Then when I ask for help, when I need a favor, suddenly you're very busy. You can't make any promises to me right now. You're just in such a situation because of whatever that you couldn't possibly do X or Y for me. And I started to get very disheartened because I realized what they were doing was putting the you in community. They were there specifically to meet their own needs rather than to be part of anything more than a piece in a whole. Knowing that people who like to write books will also want to read books. So they would market. They would ask for favors. They would ask for beta reading. But very, very rarely did they ever want to take the opportunity to invest in you personally, to read your stories, to find anything beyond a surface level connection that benefited them somehow. And that made me really sad. And so over the last year, I've left a lot of my communities, or I've become much less interactive with them. And that makes me sad because it's a lot harder to write when I'm by myself, when I'm not getting feedback, when I'm not part of a community. And that's the goal I want to have here with Friday Night Writes. I want this to be your destination for your writing community. My goal by doing this is that you find at least one writing friend, someone that will invest in you, that will be interested in your story, maybe even love it as much as you do, that will hold you accountable, that will help you when you hit hardships and obstacles and just don't know what to do anymore because it's not working. So my goal here is to create a true community where we are in this together, because we're not going to do it without each other. We need writers to stick together. You have to support each other. You have to invest beyond what can you give me. You have to be willing to return the favor sometimes. And I'm not saying you got to bend over backwards every time somebody throws out a request, but it's really disheartening to know that sometimes when I did something for you, I didn't register to be worthwhile enough for you to return the favor. Because let's be honest, writing is the most vulnerable thing you can do. You are creating something from nothing. You are pulling ideas from the ether and you're putting it onto paper. It doesn't become tangible until you make it happen. Your story is a complete 100% pure byproduct of your thoughts, your beliefs, your imagination, your experiences. Everything is filtered through the lens of you. So when somebody rejects it, even if it's just, sorry, I don't have time to even give it a second thought, that hurts. Because it's not the story they're rejecting. It's you. It truly feels that way. That you weren't worthwhile. You weren't enough. You're never going to be enough. Maybe I should just quit. And I don't want to do that anymore. So, my purpose here is, after years of working to get better at writing, after reading books, after watching videos, after going to seminars, after examining my own favorite stories of what makes me love them as much as I do, well, I've gathered quite a bit of information, but I still can't finish my stories. I'm still stuck. So what's happening? Well, now I'm here to throw that out to you guys, because I realized something helping out a buddy of mine not too long ago. A friend of mine who is an actual fully published author, has a book and everything, is working on his second project. And I loved his first book. It was actually really fun. I'd love to throw it out here. I don't know if he wants me to talk about it. I don't have permission to do so. I'm sure he'd be happy for the extra exposure, but maybe one of these days I'll get him on here, because he promised me one of these days he might actually get on here. So I'll wait for him to talk about his book. But if you like sci-fi and you like comedy, it's up your alley. Anyway, he's been working on his second project for a while now, and life's gotten in the way. Like a lot of us, we are writers who are part-timers with day jobs. You know, I teach full-time. Writing is a hobby to me right now. Until I get paid, it's just something I love and I do in my free time. But he actually has a book out. And now he has to have a follow-up. He's created a world, a universe, these characters that I really love, and I'm not willing to part with yet. So he's been fighting, trying to write this second story. And when I went and visited him in California not too long ago, we sat down and we kind of worked out a tentative outline. And just being with him, talking about his story and throwing out 1,000 ideas, I realized I can't do this for my own story. I could sit here all night, all weekend, all week, all month. I could give myself a year where I sit down in front of the computer every single day. But I'd never be able to generate the amount of ideas that I was able to throw out to him just sitting at his kitchen table talking about options for his story. And it hit me. I'm at my most creative when I'm helping other authors, other writers. Granted, I can be creative. I don't have anything at stake. Nobody is going to have to... I'm not going to have to go back and rewrite anything. I don't have to suddenly make all these ideas fit in a story I've already generated. I don't have characters whose behaviors I know and whose personalities will have to reflect the actions and decisions that happen in the book. I'm basically the muse from Dogma. I can throw out 1.5 million ideas, and I don't have to keep any for myself. Turn that around and start thinking about my own story, and I'll find a way to talk myself out of every good idea. I know what my characters will and will not do. I know the plots, so I know that might not work because X happened here, and then I'd have to go back and rewrite this, but that doesn't make sense. And I've talked myself out of a lot of really good ideas just out of the fear that I'm going to have to go back and start over. Because when you haven't even finished something, the idea of starting over again is paralyzing. But the byproduct of helping out my buddy was that I was re-energized to go back and work on my own projects. And that is why I realized it's so important to have this. We need this. We need to have somebody invested in us, even if it's only one person. So I know why I'm doing this. Because I know why stories are important. I've used them to escape many times. The last 2 years have been incredibly hard. I've lost several family members. I've had a mental breakdown. I've had some major health issues. I've had to switch jobs. I've had people completely leave my life for reasons that were out of my control, for good and bad. They were moving on to better things, and they betrayed me in some pretty heartbreaking ways. So I haven't been in the best mental state. Yet, this is what I want to focus on. I want to leave that behind now. I don't want to focus on the badness anymore. I want to move forward and focus on my creativity and use that as an outlet to get rid of some of this baggage I've been carrying around for the last couple of years. And I can't do that without knowing that this story is going to be important to somebody. Yes, it's important for me. It's a very therapeutic and cathartic? I think that's the right word. Cathartic way of releasing the anger, the frustration, all of the things I've been holding on to in the last couple of years. But at the end of the day, I don't know why I'm writing it if I'm the only one that's going to read it. It's heartbreaking to me because I want someone to find the story years down the line and say, this story saved my life. This was my favorite story. This character was me because those stories in my life changed my life. So I know the importance that story has. I know I have to do this. I'm not a religious person, but I believe whatever universal thing goes on in this place that we live in, something inside of me was there for me to put a story into this world. So another person finds that story and finds hope and comfort in it. But why can't I finish? That's because I can't put it out there without that human connection. So here I am, connecting to you across the internet, hoping that this is the beginning of a beautiful thing. That Friday nights will come together and we'll talk about writing and we'll learn from each other. And maybe, just maybe, we'll finish stories. and have something that we can put into the world and share with each other. So, that being said, I'm going to scroll down on my notes and we're going to move on. Because I am making a big assumption here that you came tonight after having seen something I advertised on Twitter or Tumblr or talking to me in real life, and I was like, hey, you're a writer person, come watch my show. I am going to make the assumption that most people here have already committed to writing. That they maybe have started some project before, whether it's fan fiction or just something scribbled down in a notebook. Maybe right now it's just a plot bunny. Maybe it's 55,000 words that are sitting in a Google Doc on your drive right now that you just can't seem to move past chapter 13. I don't know anybody who would have that problem. But anyway, I'm going to assume while doing this show that we are writers who have been doing this for a while. Now, granted, I don't want to scare off any newbie writers. The things we talk about here are definitely going to be beneficial to you. They're going to be helpful for you to examine the way that story is structured, the way that we create stories, the process we have to go through, and the expectations that readers will have of our stories. And we're going to do that because we're going to go back and look at our own works in progress and figure out what went wrong. And to do that, we have to start at square one. So, if you have come here tonight after having seen my show last Friday or having seen something that I've posted, hopefully you came prepared. Or maybe you're within reach and you can just reach over and grab that notebook, or you can go back on Google or wherever you have your story stored on your computer, you can pull that up. Because what I want to do tonight is take out those old works in progress and I want to look at them and really ask ourselves, why did we stop writing this story? What is it about this story that was unfixable in that moment? Because the thing about stories are, they're not unfixable. Even the worst story is better than nothing. And my example for that is, as a teacher, a special ed teacher, I am an inclusion teacher. I go into other classes and I assist the main regular ed teacher. And one of the classes I've had to do in the last couple of years that I hate, because I struggle with math myself, I hate going in a math class. I hate trying to help kids with math. It makes me feel like a giant idiot. Because a lot of times they're staring at a problem and they don't know how to solve it. And the minute I see numbers, my brain completely freezes up and it's like, I have never learned how to do math in my entire life. So I, being a person who most of my kids generally think is a pretty intelligent human being, now feel super incompetent. And there's nothing worse than that, especially somebody who has the perfectionist issues that I have. So the one thing I can tell them though, even if I honestly don't know how to solve the problem, I can't even begin to figure out what they're doing wrong. Because most of the time, they're staring at a problem with nothing on the page. They haven't even attempted to solve it on paper. They've only tried to do it in their brain. The problem is they usually miss a step, or they didn't have the right variable, or they did something wrong, subtracted the wrong number, or got the wrong number when they were doing whatever math they were doing. And I don't know what they messed up. So if you are able to show me your work, if you can sit down and say, hey, Leibs, something went wrong somewhere. I don't know what it is. And I can look at the steps you have taken. I can clearly see where you put the wrong variable in, or where you miscalculated something, or where you missed a step completely, where there's gaps and holes in the process. But without that, we can't fix it. We can't find the solution together if I don't know what I'm working with. And that's where we have to start as writers with our unfinished projects. If we truly want to get back to writing, even if it is the worst thing you've ever written, if you think that there is no way you could make this work, you still have to go back, look at your work, and figure out what went wrong. Because I guarantee you, no story is unfixable. So, question one that I'm going to pose to you guys tonight. Why did you abandon your project? If you are still working on it, why are you losing momentum? So, if you abandoned your project, why did you stop? And if you're still fighting through a project, which I've never technically truly stopped writing my stories, I've been working on the same two projects since 2008. one I stopped writing on to move to the other one and then hit a wall with that, and then I would bounce back and forth in between. So I've never truly stopped writing. I just take extended breaks. But I know where I lost momentum because I've sat down and analyzed it. Why did you abandon your project? Was it you didn't realize the time suck it was going to become and how much work is actually involved in writing a story? Is it that you got a really great idea and then you sat down and write it and realized, oh wait, I don't know anything about science or history or this particular job that I think my character should have, and then suddenly the words wouldn't come because you honestly didn't know what you were writing about? Did you not understand story structure enough that you were just sitting down writing, free writing every single time that you sat down and realized that there's nothing about the story that links the scenes together? There's no character development because you're just writing stream of consciousness, whatever the character that did that day. Because trust me, there's nothing more boring than the character woke up and then he went down to breakfast and then he had oatmeal and his mom said hi and then he went to school. No, that story sucks and no one will read it. So what happened? Was it a mechanical issue? Or did you kind of just get bored with your story because maybe you just didn't know how stories work? You wrote whatever came to your head and realized this isn't very good. Chances are, if you experienced any of these, you got to a point where you were paralyzed, where anytime you actually tried to continue with the project to put words on paper, you got blocked. The words wouldn't come. You lost the motivation. You got frustrated. You beat yourself up a little bit about it because you felt like you weren't good enough or this was a waste of time, and you stopped. So let's talk a little bit about what writer's block is and what it really isn't. Because technically, writer's block doesn't exist. Writer's block is a misnomer. It is something entirely different. It is not a lack of imagination. It is your inability to access your imagination, your creative juices, to get into that flow state that writers and painters and musicians and creatives talk about. What writer's block is anxiety, which is why I wore my I've got anxiety shirt that I just got in the mail. Because I, as a person who have fought with anxiety my entire life, realized very recently, and I apologize for me having to stop and wipe my nose so much. This cold could not have been more inappropriately timed. But I realized that my anxiety that I struggle with on a daily basis has crept into my writing. And I finally decided I wasn't going to allow that to be an excuse for why I couldn't write anymore. And really delving into what writer's block is and understanding that it's my fear of not being able to be a perfect writer. And by perfect, I mean when I write the first time in my drafting process, I want it to be my only draft. I want to not have to go back and do continuous drafting over and over again. So I want the words that come out to be perfect when I start. But that's impossible. It's not going to happen. I have to be able to write crap. I have to be able to show my work and go back and figure out what happened. But I don't want that. I don't want to do all this work. It's taken me so long to get what I have at this point that the idea of having to do multiple drafts of anything, all I think about is the time it's going to take. I've already been doing this for so long. I want to get it done. I need to get it done. And it needs to be as good as it can be the first time. But that puts all this undue pressure on me because then I have to get it right the first time. I have to know in and out the story. I have to know how it starts. I have to know how it ends. I have to know every plot point. There's no fun to it anymore. There's no discovery of it anymore. And that's where I hit my block. The words won't come. I have to stop. I don't want to write anymore. How about we just go watch some Netflix or I'll read a book. That'll help. So I've used the excuse of doing research, of reading books and watching movies and television shows to get inspirational ideas and figure out what my story lacks as an excuse for I have written myself into corners because I've been so anxious about my own ability to write. I know I'm a good writer. I know this, not just because I go back and read my stuff sometimes and think, damn, that was really good. Or because people have gone back and said, damn, that was really good. But I know that the stuff I'm reading, and I go back and read over and over again and think, man, I wish I could write like that all the time, I'm denying myself the thought and the acknowledgement that that is not a first draft of anything, and something I've gone back over and rewritten, perfected, cleaned up, gotten to a point where I'm proud of it. That doesn't happen on the first time. If it does, it's incredible, but it's rare. And so my big frustration is that I have got to get over this panic that I feel and this fear that I've got to get it right the first time, and I've got to get it done as fast as possible, and it's got to be great because I don't have enough time. And that is a lie I have convinced myself to believe, and that is the obstacle I have to get over. So my personal frustrations have caused a lot of anxiety for me to work on a project that I truly love, and it got me to the point where I didn't love it anymore. It wasn't that I was bored with it or I didn't believe in it. It's that it physically pained me. It physically pained me to write this story anymore. So I know that writing is not unfixable. I know that I have to go back and redo it. I just don't want to. And it's easier to quit than to think about it in this long-term project. So one of the things that I've had to readjust and do is think about things in smaller increments. Don't worry about finishing a novel today. Don't worry about finishing an act of a story today. Don't worry about an entire character arc. Just get some words on paper. Finish a page. And then maybe finish a scene. And then worry about the bigger picture. That's been very helpful to me. The other thing I have to do is give myself permission to suck. I have to be willing to accept that what I put down on paper the first time, because I'm old-fashioned and I like pen on paper first, and then I go back and type it. And that's how ingrained this process is in me, is that even though I hate going back and redoing stuff, I've already implemented a small editing part because I go through my handwritten to retype it and I add to it. And it already gets better the second time. So honestly, what I type on paper isn't even my first draft. It's kind of automatically my second draft. Or if you want to consider it my first draft, what I wrote was a 0 draft the first time. So I have to give myself permission to suck. And I have to be willing to put the time in. But I can't think about that when I'm writing the first time, because I will get paralyzed and quit. So this leads me to my second important question as I scroll through my notes. Sorry, I have another leakage issue. It's really frustrating that this happened after a month of work and preparing for this stream tonight because I was so excited about it. And I just feel like a skeezy, gross, like sniffling slob on camera tonight. So I really apologize for that. So where are you at in your current work in progress? Is it something that's just like, hey, I got this really cool idea and I wrote it down on a napkin somewhere? Or are you 50,000 words in? Is it a couple of chapters? Maybe you have a synopsis and a couple of character profiles. Maybe you have an outline and you haven't actually started writing the story yet. Like wherever you're at, that's great. It's a starting point. It's something that we can take and break down and analyze to figure out where the flaws are in it, so you don't give up on it. I have 2 projects stuck at like the 1/3 mark of completion. It's like right at, if you were looking at it as a 3-act structure, it's right at the end of the first act. It's right before you hit the middle. You haven't quite hit the arc of like the major incidents that's going to be the turning point, but you've already kind of hit a point of no return where the characters are changing. And the characters are established, and the conflict is established, and the villain's established, and now I'm bored because now I have to fill in the middle. And that's the part I never get to, is filling in the middle. I might even know how the story ends, but without knowing all of the bits in the middle, I can't figure out how I get from A to Z, because B through Y are like complete mysteries to me, and that's really frustrating to me. So I'll start to type, and I'm like continuously in a discovery phase of where I'm just like throwing out ideas and I'm typing up scenes, and then I get to a really great idea and it's like, crap, now I gotta go back because I'm at scene K and it's amazing and I really want to include this story, but now I have to go back to scene D and fix it to make it not seem like this idea just popped out of nowhere. Otherwise, I end up with like a Deus Ex Machina where I need to fit in things that happened. So that gets really tiresome to me because I feel like I'm going back and editing, and I don't want to edit at that point. I want to go forward and I don't want to go backwards. So that's where I get frustrated. When I hit the point where, okay, it's time to go back and start fixing parts of the story to make it fit the new parts of the story, that's where I lose my momentum. So what we're going to do tonight, hopefully together, is we are going to take a work in progress that you currently have. We are going to talk a little bit about how we're going to look at it. And hopefully your homework for tonight will be you start to write an outline for that work in progress. Even if you already have one, even if it's something you already have written and typed up, we're going to go back to the basics here. To get back into writing a project that we have abandoned, we have to go back to the basics. We have to show our work and figure out what went wrong. So before I get into that, I'm going to take a very quick break so I can drink some of my tea. I can catch my breath because I feel very winded. I want to scroll through the chat, so hopefully I can answer some questions. So if you guys just give me like 30 seconds to a minute, I'm going to collect myself. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about the importance of outlining. And I already know some people are screaming at me because they're probably pantsers or they're probably plotters and they already have an outline. Excuse me. But we'll talk about that when I come back. So give me just a couple of seconds to collect myself. Let me scroll through the chat. So thanks. Hey, thanks for sticking around. I really apologize for having to take that break. Like I said, I am super frustrated that I am not feeling well and that the timing of this, I mean, I literally woke up with a cold this morning. I have been having respiratory issues for a while, but the sinus drainage and the congestion and all of the hacking that I've been dealing with all day, like that just showed up today. I feel like the universe is conspiring against me, so I'm trying not to feel like it's personal. The universe is trying to punish me for something. So thank you for dealing with my runny nose and my hoarseness and having to take a break every once in a while. So that's really cool of you. I appreciate it. And thank you for being here. If you're just joining us, if you popped in long after I did my introduction, welcome to Friday Night Writes. Thank you very much for coming and hanging out with us tonight. If you found me via social media and you're here to talk about writing, or you were one of our secret bonus viewers that pops in when I was testing my feed the other night, thank you for coming in, and I'm really excited to begin this journey with you of building a writing community together. So let's get back to what I promised we were going to talk about. We are going to talk a little bit about outlining tonight. And I know to a lot of people that is a dirty word. They don't want to use some kind of formulaic process to stifle their creativity, even if it helps lay out their story. So I know that every pantser right now that is watching this is screaming their head off at me saying, that's not how I write. Okay, bear with me for a second. And the plotters are just as angry because there's no way they've started a story at this point and have anything written without already doing the outline first. I know this because I'm one of them. Now, I'm a little bit of a reformed pantser, and I think every writer truly starts off being a pantser. And, you know, I should even go back and clarify. If you don't understand what I'm talking about being a plotter or a plotter is someone who writes their plot out, who outlines their plot, who knows what they're going to write before they write the scenes. A pantser literally writes by the seat of their pants. They're going in constant discovery, and whatever ideas they get that come to them in the flow state, in the moment, that's what they're writing down, which makes a more chaotic story, but it also makes a more inventive story. The problem is you got to go back and find ways of making everything link up. So if you're a pantser, this is going to be perfect for you, especially if you have already abandoned a project, because you're going to be able to go back and retcon some of the stuff that you've already written and figure out how it fits to the greater arc of an actual story. For you plotters out there, I know you're already upset with me. You've written out your outline, but you abandoned it, right? You stopped writing for some reason. Something went wrong. So those of you who have already written an outline, bear with me. Let's go back and examine it and figure out where we made our mistakes so we can work on it and get it better. For those of you who are pantsers and have never actually sat down and figured out what you want to write before you write it, this is going to be a new experience for you, and it's going to feel like you're stifled and a bit backwards and you're not really getting anywhere. You just want to put words on the paper, but trust me, this will be helpful in the long run, because ultimately what we want to be able to do is outsmart writers' anxiety. Even if we are paralyzed because the words won't come to us in the moment, we at least should have a starting point of what words we should be looking for. And the thing that I like about having an outline is even when I'm frustrated, I know what my goal is for that scene. I know what I have to accomplish in that scene. So even if it turns out to be complete crap, I at least know why I'm bothering to write that scene. And if I have to skip that scene and write another scene and come back to it, there's always something there. I didn't just leave a gap in my story that I know I will have to come back in and fill in later. So the couple options we have for outlining, and I shouldn't say a couple because there's actually like a dozen. I'm not going to sit here and explain every single option to you. Part of the thing about the discovery of writing is finding what's going to work for you. And honestly, I think you would be bored to death if I sat here and went through all of the different examples. I will talk about them. If you want to go through and explore them yourself, which I really encourage you to, if you don't already have like a plot outline that you are like tried and true and you know that you want to use, the link to the show notes, if you scroll down on my Twitch page, there's a little tag that says show notes. That is a link. You can click on that button right there and it will take you to a shared Google Doc, which has the show notes. I will put the show notes for every episode that I do in there. If you know a better way of doing this where I can link it directly onto my page, I would appreciate that. I want to be able to show my notes for the episode, but the problem is I don't want to have to continuously update my Twitch page every time. Pardon me. If this was YouTube, like we used to do back in the day, I'd be able to put the show notes right in the description, but I haven't figured out how to do that on Twitch, if it's even possible. So the best thing I figured out is that I created a doc, and I will keep a monthly doc, and all the episodes that I do on Fridays, and then the other shows that I plan on doing on Tuesdays, where we talk more about like the obstacles we're facing as writers rather than the actual technical stuff that we're doing. I'll talk about that later. All the show notes, anything that I reference as a resource, as a book or anything like that, I'll leave those in there. Now for the outlining stuff that I've got here, I've included a bunch of different links to websites that I have used myself, that I've gone through and I've figured out all of these different outlines. I've outlined this story that I'm working on multiple times using different methods, and I've only just recently, within like the last month or so, kind of around the time that I decided I wanted to do the show, did I discover the two things that were truly going to work as an effective outline for my story. So I've been doing this for a really long time, and I'm still going back and recreating things. So a couple of the different options we have. The first thing that you can do is just simply sit down and write out everything you know about your story. You can create like a synopsis with some character descriptions. You're just kind of word vomiting onto a Word doc or onto a notebook page where everything you can think of in chronological, sequential order, you write down from the beginning to the end, or whatever you've figured out, because a lot of times it doesn't happen that easily. It doesn't come from beginning to end. It's just what parts you know you want to include. Every idea, every character, plot points, twists, all of that jazz. So you just sit down and you write it out, and you create a long-winded synopsis with some character descriptions. That is the least organized way you can do it. You're pretty much just starting out with getting whatever ideas out so you have them written down somewhere. Pardon me, so you don't forget them later. Basically, every time I've started a story, it started as one doc where I just put every idea I could think of into that doc, starting with the names of characters, who they were, what relationship they had in the story, the main points I wanted to hit, some of the backstory, things like that. It's just me getting all of that idea out onto a Word doc or a piece of paper or something, just so I don't forget it. Because I have a really bad habit of coming up with a really brilliant idea, and if I don't write it down, it's gone. I'm never going to remember it, and I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. So the easiest and like least organized thing you can do is just sit down and write whatever you can of your story in a synopsis, and then give your characters some descriptions or profiles. Another way is called fractal plotting, also called the snowflake method. This one is a really old and tried and true story method. I've seen a ton of websites talk about it. The one that I like the best description of comes from Mythcreans, though. It doesn't originally start on Mythcreans. Mythcreans.com is a website that I've used like as long as I knew that websites existed for writing. And they cover a lot of really cool concepts of anything from like the basics of story structure to like LGBT characters and diversity and representation and things like that. And so they cover like an amazing gamut of things, and I've stolen a lot of resources from them, so thank you, mythcreans.com. But there is an excellent article in the show notes that talks about fractal plotting. But what is fractal plotting? Pardon me. Think of it like I said, a snowflake. So you start off with an idea, and then you build on that idea. So it's like a snowflake has, you start off with like a six-sided shape, and then each of those points you build another point off of, and then you build another point off of that, and then another point off of that. And I'm not going to try and explain it here because it's way more complicated, but that's something that you can check out on the show notes down there. The thing that I have recently switched from, going back to looking at the structure of story itself, for a really long time, I was trying to write 3-act stories. I realized the problem is I am very much used to movies. I started watching movies as a kid and became obsessed with them. I wanted to be an actress for a really long time. And my love of stories came from my love of movies. And that's always colored the type of stories I enjoy, which is probably why I like action-adventure stories as much as I do. And I'm trying to write stories visually in my head. I see them as a movie, but they never fit into the structure of a book. And I would get so frustrated. And I realized that's because I'm trying to fit a 4-act story into a 3-act structure, and that does not work. So if you have studied any kind of story at all, like in your basic English class, you know that there are 3 acts, right? You got the beginning, the middle, and the end. So you're going to have your hook and your rising action starting in the beginning, and then once the characters are established, you're going to come to a middle point, and then there's like a turning point that the character can't go back from, and then you're going to start your progression to the climax, which is the highest point of action, and then you drop. Because after the climax, there's really nowhere to go. There's no more rising action. So you drop down, have your denouement, and then the story ends. You find the resolution. So you've got your beginning with your rising action. You got your middle point in the middle, your turning point, and then once you hit the climax, you start your downward progression into the 3rd act. I couldn't write a story that fit that because I was trying to write 4-act stories. And there's a really great article that I found from a website, I think it was called Rinse and Repeat, again, in the show notes, because I'm not going to try and explain all this stuff on the air because I just don't think I can remember it or do any kind of honest, like, breakdown of it that would be worthwhile here. If I was in my classroom, it'd be different. I could have, like, my board and I could be showing you diagrams and stuff, but I honestly haven't figured out how to do that on Twitch yet. Maybe eventually we'll be able to do that, and I can, like, do live diagrams and things like that. But I figured it would just be too boring if I tried to do that on like paper and hold it up, or maybe just too lame. But the thing about 4 acts is the Rinse and Repeat website, the author on there broke her own story down into the 4-act structure and rewrote what movies had been doing with their 4 acts into one that would fit into the scenes of a book. And so essentially what she does is she takes each act and turns it into like the full arc of what a story would be, starting with like the inciting incident all the way to the resolution. And I really love the way she does that, because basically what she does is she takes one arc and turns it into 4 parts. And the only difference is by the end of the 4th act, you have obviously a different ending because you need a continuation from act to act. But when you get to the 4th one, she adds like a couple extra scene beats onto the end to close everything up. And once I read that, it was astounding to me because I realized, oh my god, that basically fits exactly what I'm already doing with my story, which is really what inspired me to focus on this for my first episode, because knowing that I already had an outline in a story and knowing it wasn't working, the minute I found the structure that worked, everything changed for me. Now, granted, I still haven't finished my story and it's been like 2 or 3 weeks since I like found the idea, but I have been prepping a show on top of that, so I'm going to use that as an excuse. But once I found something that would work, it renewed my hope in this project. Like, I didn't feel like it was going to be such a waste of time anymore, or that I was working towards nothing. So that is why I emphasize, even if you have an outline that you've stuck to, you go back. Hey, thank you. I appreciate the follow there, Sarah Graham. Thanks for joining us tonight. So even if you already have that outline that you've focused on, go back and take a second look at it. There is a reason it's not working. And that's why I'm encouraging you guys to go through and do some investigative research on these different types of outline. Because when I first sat down and made an outline, I literally just like plugged plot points in. I didn't focus on the order of those plot points. I didn't think about the beats I needed in a story, why they were important, why the scene should be included. It was just whatever I thought of in chronological order, I put those scenes in. And that's part of why my story didn't work for a really long time. Another really important aspect of outlining and story creation, especially because I write fantasy stories, I tend to write more fantasy, speculative fiction, I guess you could call that. Knowing and understanding the hero's journey, the heroine's journey, a new really cool thing that I found called the Virgin's Promise, that sounds a lot kinkier than it is, and the Fool's Journey. So understanding those 4 arcs and how they work into mythic, epic, fantasy, sci-fi-esque speculative fiction stories is really, really important. And the thing that I also a couple years ago realized is, looking at the hero's journey, I tend to write female characters, and my MCs are almost always female characters. They don't fit the hero's journey. The way that Joseph Campbell wrote that it is very patriarchal. And I'm not saying he intentionally did that or he's a sexist or anything like, but it is very gender based. And because of that, unless you make very specific changes to your female characters to fit a masculine archetype, the hero's journey doesn't necessarily work for them. So one of the beautiful things that I found on Mythcrans, and one of the reasons I love them, and the way they focus on diversity and inclusivity and things like that, is they posted an article about something called the heroine's journey. And it was mind-blowing to me. I was like, oh my god, there's like a whole other way to do this specifically for my female characters. A couple weeks ago, I found something called the Virgin's Promise, which is another take on the heroine's journey. It's very different. I was trying to break them down today to kind of give you a difference between the two, and I'm not even sure I wholly understand the difference. I do know that I like the Virgin's Promise much better, and it's going to fit with my story better than the heroine's journey. But on top of that, so we've got the hero's journey, the heroine's journey, the Virgin's Promise, and the fool's journey, which is... The best way I can describe it is I read, my favorite book ever is Christopher Moore's Fool, which is a take on King Lear. It is simultaneously the funniest and dirtiest book I've ever written, and it solidified that Christopher Moore is my favorite author. But it almost is perfect for that story, or that arc, because it literally is the fool. It is the jester from King Lear's court. It's from his perspective, following the story of King Lear, and it's very entertaining. So if you are interested at all in fantasy stories, sci-fi stories, any type of speculative fiction, especially ones involving a quest or a journey, I extremely emphasize checking out the links I have posted in the show notes for the hero, heroines, Virgin's Promise, and Fool's Journeys, because to truly understand how fantasy fiction works, you have to understand that story. There are specific archetypes that work. One of the things I plan on talking about, probably in the next show, I think is when I'm going to be able to work it in, is we're going to talk about story conventions or genre conventions, and how certain stories have certain expectations they've laid out that whether or not you intend to include them, simply because of the genre you have written your story in. And even if you write literary and you're like, I don't write genre, I, like blah, blah, blah. You can give me 10,000 reasons why you don't write genre. But the person who picks up your book and reads that story, they're truly the person that gets to decide the genre, not you. They're going to have certain expectations. And their expectations and how they expect those expectations to be fulfilled will mean the difference between them liking your story and hating your story, or hopefully loving your story. But meeting those reader expectations is really important, and I mean, that's an episode to come. We're still working on our outlines here, people. But to understand story convention and obligatory scenes, especially in spec fic, you need to understand the importance those four archetypal stories play in that genre. One of my favorite things that I explored within the last couple of years, especially being the huge Rick and Morty fan that I am, the story structure and writing process that Dan Harmon uses for every Rick and Morty episode, for every episode of Community that he ever created, basically as long as he has been writing. Dan Harmon looked at story structure and decided he didn't like it and created his own. And obviously it's working pretty well, because Rick and Morty has become a phenomenon, and Community was really popular back in the day when it was on too. So he must know something we don't. It is very much based and is reminiscent of the hero's journey, but Dan Harmon has his own take on it. And I believe that link in the story notes actually has a video that goes along with it. I can't remember if I included that or not. I'd have to look. My links are in a completely different part of my script in my notes for tonight. But if I remember correctly and I was smart, I included a video description for that breaks down how the story circle works and how Dan Harmon uses it and how it relates back to the hero's journey. The last thing that I want to talk about specifically with the outlining process that we are going to be using tonight is something called emotional arcs. Technically, I don't think they count as story structure. I'm not 100% on that. But something Kurt Vonnegut came up with a bajillion years ago was something, I think he was working on his thesis back when he was in college, like his master's thesis or his doctoral thesis, or maybe, I don't remember the specific story behind it. But he got very scientific about story, and he broke down and realized there were certain patterns that types of stories fell into. So like fairy tales or action type stories, like redemption stories, like he found out the specific types of stories that we tend to write, and he charted them like you would chart the ups and downs of a graph. And he created specific shapes for stories. And from that, he called them emotional arcs, because it's the emotional arc of, I don't remember if it was the emotional arc of the reader as they went on them, or if it was like the character's emotional arc, but it helps you establish important aspects of what a story needs. And it helps, more than anything, it's character driven. And so the thing about plotting and outlining is you're hitting the specific things your story needs. And one of the biggest told arguments that writers get into is whether stories should be plot driven or whether they should be character driven. And the obvious answer is they should be both. You have to have a plot to have a foundation in your story, but the character has to be making the choices along the plot. Like, they are the driving factor. If your character is passive and things are happening to your character, this is gonna be a boring ass story. Your character has to be making choices and mistakes and decisions and taking action that impacts the order the story goes in. So understanding the emotional arcs of stories and characters is very important, so you have a good balance between the progression of your character as a whole, because your character has to change. If you get to the end of your story and you have the same character you started out with and there isn't a good reason for that, you did story wrong. You completely messed up that story. It's not going to work. You have to have change over the course of that story, or else nobody's going to want to read it. It's just going to be a stream of consciousness of a bunch of boring things that happen to a character. That being said, another important aspect that you have to include in your story, especially to emphasize the change, is you have to make bad things happen to your character. And I know it's hard. We love our characters. They become aspects of ourselves. They're like our best friends who live in our brain, and we don't want to think about bad things happening to them. But nobody wants to read a story where nothing happens. We don't care about a person's normal day. If we did, we would be content with our own lives. We wouldn't need the escape into another person's life. You have to create conflict in your story. People have to break up. People have to die. Things have to get stolen. Things have to go away. They have to lose things. They have to gain things. They have to face obstacles. Like, things have to happen that force your character to make choices. If that is not happening, again, you are storying wrong. Understanding the outlines that I have mentioned to you guys tonight will help you know where you need to put in obstacles and whether you have or not included those obstacles. Because at the end of the day, if your character isn't changing because they aren't facing any conflict, nobody's going to want to read that story. And if you don't believe me, get on Wattpad and look at any story that isn't written by one of the semi-professionals on that website, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Give me 1 second. I need to take a drink. Give me a chance to show off my cool mug that I just bought. I'm really excited about this. Give me a chance to show off some of my nerddom. I also have a really cool D20 cup. Sorry. Everything's backwards. It's really hard for me. I have a really cool D20 cup back there, and it looks almost exactly like the one I have on here. Sorry, I really got on a tangent. I'm talking about all of the things that you need in a story. I got really passionate for a second. Made me thirsty. So, go do some outside research. Go onto the website. Follow that link. So, click on click on show notes. Go to the Word doc. Check out those websites. Part of your homework for next week, if you want to be able to follow along with the progression of the show and actually kind of hopefully hit the milestones that I would like for us to hit as a group, go back, look at those websites, and really gauge which of these types of outlines are going to be the most helpful and effective and fit your story. Because otherwise, you're going to be like me and you're going to say, oh, okay, every story's got 3 acts, right? Everybody knows that. I'm obviously going to have to write a story just like everybody else. And then you're going to try and write a story that doesn't fit into the right structure, and it's going to cause you pain and suffering and loss of time, and you're going to want to give up on it. So that's the whole point of what we're doing tonight, right? We're trying to figure out what went wrong. So really look at your outline, if you have one, and try to see, based on the other types of outlining and story structure, whether or not your story truly fits the structure you have already established for it. If it doesn't, there are umpteen million different ways you can write that story. The ones I put on here are just the beginning. Those are just the ones I knew about. I'm still discovering ways to plot my stories. The idea I want to use right now, the Virgin's Promise, is something I just found within the last couple weeks. As I was reading the article, I was genuinely pissed because I don't know how many times I have reread and re-examined and re-researched the hero and heroine's and Fool's journey, and never once did I ever stumble across this, yet it was invented in 2010. So how is it for a decade I have not been able to find this? It wasn't linked to something. So it's important, if your structure of your story is not working, there is something out there that will work. You just have to find it. And the only way for you to do that is to compare what you have to what your options are and find what is going to work best for you. So currently in my work in progress, like I said, I have 2 of them. I'm more actively working on one currently. What I'm going to be working on my story called Intrepid, I am going to be reworking that story into 4 acts that now, for my MC, main character, follows the Virgin's Promise. Like I said, that sounds way kinkier than it actually is. The whole idea behind the Virgin's Promise is that the person that is your main character is I don't want to use the word pure because that's not the right, but they're naive, and that they haven't become their full self yet. They're trying to adhere to what society wants them to be rather than what they actually are. And, there's a million coming of age stories that are that conflict between your identity of who you truly are versus what the role you feel you need to fill in society. So my 4-act structure and the story beats following the Virgin's Promise are what I now have to go back and look at my story of what I already have written and what I have planned in the future and figure out where those are going to fall in. And that's why next week, after I get my outline done, we're going to be able to go back and look at our outlines and figure out where the gaps are. What do we still need to do to fill in the holes of how our story is laid out? Because I guarantee you're not going to have it all figured out. If you do already have a 100% outline story and you're stuck on it, I don't know what to tell you at this point. I've never gotten that far. So I'm sure that there's another problem that we'll hit over the course of the show where you find the reason your outline that you have isn't working. And maybe it is you already outlined it, but like I said, it's the wrong structure or it's not hitting the right beats. You don't have the right scenes in it, something like that. So go back, research, examine, play around with stuff. Don't be afraid to go back and redo stuff. I know that's my hardest thing, is that I don't want to go back and start again. I don't want to start again, because I feel like I've restarted so many times. The story I'm working on, I started working on because I couldn't go back and work on my other project again. It was too disheartening to go back and start over because I had it in my mind that if I wasn't making progress, making any kind of progress at all in the story was worthwhile. But I wasn't getting anywhere. I was just stagnating in a story. So I was editing and drafting and redrafting and working on the beginning of the story, and that was great. But then I set myself up for failure because when I would try to make progress, the stuff I had I was writing new wasn't anywhere near as good as the stuff I already had. So I was falling into the spiral of, it was a fluke, or I'm not as good of a writer as I thought, or the idea isn't good because I can't carry it out. When really it boiled down to the fact that I had just taken the stuff at the beginning of the story and reworked it so many times. It was in its 5th incarnation versus the stuff I was just writing fresh was somewhere between 0 and 1. There's no way you can compare those two things. But because I was frustrated that what I was writing now wasn't as good as what I had, I fell into a shame spiral. And I don't know how to describe it. I psyched myself out. I convinced myself that what I was doing wasn't as good. It would never be as good. There was no point in writing it. Why continue? So I completely pushed aside a story I'd been working on for several years with characters that I loved, with people who had invested in that story, who had read parts of it, who wanted me to keep going. But because I had convinced myself it wasn't good enough, I pushed it aside, went to another story, and did the same exact thing. So now I have 2 works in progress that are at a complete standstill because I convinced myself I wasn't good enough as a writer because I had set myself up for failure. So that's why it's important that I go back and realize I don't have writer's block. I have writer's anxiety. I am so focused on writing perfection. I'm not concerned with writing at all. Because if I was just concerned with writing, I would just put words on paper. But I'm so concerned about the product, about who's going to read it, when it's going to get read, how it's going to get interpreted, whether or not people are going to find the plot holes, whether or not the story is going to make sense, whether it's cliched. I get so worried about the end product, I can't even make a product. I can't make a prototype to begin with. And that's where I get this defeatist attitude that it's not worth it to do. And that makes me really sad because I know in the end it's going to be worth it. And I want to write the story more than anything. So that's my goal for 2020, along with working on this show and helping to create a community with you guys. I have got to get over that obstacle that I have of feeling like I've got to write perfection or that I don't have to draft, and accepting that what I'm going to write is crap, but no story is unfixable. Focusing on the small is probably going to be the only thing that gets me to finish this story. Thinking about one scene at a time, one paragraph at a time, hell, one sentence at a time. There are some days that getting a complete sentence down on a piece of paper is a triumph after weeks of feeling paralyzed to be able to even write. And it's those small victories that I really have to focus on and realize it's the only way it's going to get me through to keep me motivated to do this. The other side of that is hopefully having a community of people willing to invest in me, having a community worth investing in, having a group of people to come together. Because like I said, I'm at my best when I am helping other writers thrive. That's the whole point of me reaching out, of doing this show, of trying to create this community. I really envy the idea of working in a writer's room or being part of like a creative collective. Anytime I watch shows where I know there's like a group of writers like The Daily Show, or when I watch Hasan Minhaj, Patriot Act, I see them like behind the scenes and they're in the writer's room, or Saturday Night Live. I really like the concept of that. I love the idea of a group of people coming together and all working collaboratively. Now, in the aspect of my own projects, I don't want anybody to write the story for me. I don't want a hand holder to tell me, here's an idea, now make it happen. To be honest, my biggest frustration when I would try to interact with writing communities, especially when I was around or working with younger, less experienced writers, my biggest frustration was when I'd go into a forum to answer questions or to help, and their number one question was, where do you guys get your ideas? Give me an idea. Tell me what I should write about. Well, I can never figure out why people wanted to write if they didn't have an idea to start with. I don't know why people get wrapped up in the idea of being a writer if they're not interested in telling a story. I can't even fathom that. It does not make any sense to me. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Like, ideas are so free, it's not even funny. Walk outside, you'll find an idea. Ideas are cheap, but they're useless without being able to execute them properly. Like I said, I'm like the muse in Dogma. I can throw out 1.5 million ideas, especially when you give me some kind of fuel. When you say, I have this character, or this is my setting, or whatever, I can pull back on my history knowledge, my science knowledge, all of that, and throw out ideas for you. And I even get kind of excited about it. I was like, oh man, that's a really good idea. I wish I'd have thought of that for my own story. But I can't because I limit myself. I talk myself out of good ideas. Excuse me, I need another drink. So, and I just lost my train of thought. That's embarrassing. So anyway, ideas are a dime a dozen. Oh, sorry. I just remember what I was talking about. Ideas are free. They're a dime a dozen. Why do you want to write a story if you don't already have a story? Is it just you're obsessed with the idea of being a writer? Like you like the idea of having recognition? My purpose for writing, more than anything else, is I want to put a story out there that someone can read and find hope in. Stories were therapeutic for me growing up. They're still therapeutic for me. That is why I have a shelf full of them behind me. Even books I didn't like served a purpose reading them. I want to be somebody's favorite author someday, and I want to write the story that either mentally, emotionally, or physically saved them. So why can't I do it? Why is it so hard for me to do something that means so much to me? It's maddening. I hate it so much. So when people don't even have that much of an investment in it, like I've already given blood, sweat, and tears for these stories, and I can't even make them happen, and you're on a forum begging people for ideas, that drives me insane. I digress to whatever I was talking about. God, I wish I had a co-host so I could riff off of somebody. It's really hard to just sit here and spin off of the air. But I really want to create a community. I want to have people to collaborate with. I want to be able to throw out an idea to a group and say, God, I'm really struggling with this. What do you guys think? I guess this would be actually a good time to transition into what I would like to do on Tuesdays with another show I want to do. Technically, it's the same show, but it's like a different version of the show. On Fridays, I plan on having Friday Night Writes, where we talk specifically about a goal we have for the week, talk about techniques and process and method and methodology and all the technical aspects of writing, and work specifically on our work in progress. But on Tuesdays, I'd really like to sit down and talk shop, throw out an idea to the group, and try to solve it together. Because we are always better at solving the problems of others rather than our own problems. And even if we would come together and throw out 1,000 ideas that the writer seemed useless, there's a kernel somewhere in there. There's always something. Even when I sit with my husband and try to work problems out with my own story, I love him so much for the grief that I put him through, because I will shoot down every single idea he has. And my buddy has also flat out told me, that's not going to work. Like that idea will not work. I cannot use that. But even for everything I've ever shut down of ideas and brainstorming and idea generation, I always end up with like at least one thing, if not multiple things, where I go, wait a minute. I liked that idea within the idea. Maybe I could make it work if I did this. There's always some kernel of something I can take and use and twist around to make it fit my story in the way that I need it to. And that is not something I could have done on my own, even if I sat for weeks at a time. Because the beauty of collaboration is having an outside perspective, a different way of filtering whatever you want to see through a different lens. And that's really, really important, especially considering you're not going to be the person getting to judge your story. Once that story is out there and it's published, the readers get to decide the meaning behind that story. And the earlier you can get feedback and collaboration on that story, the faster and better and more, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the word, and that's really frustrating. But the faster it's going to be able to be received by others and be more, there's a word. I can't think of it. My cold is finally starting to eat my brain, so I probably won't be able to do this much longer. But just the idea of getting input and feedback of what the meaning of that story is, the faster you can get it in the hands of people, the better off you are. Now, the problem with that is you don't want to show, you don't want like really, really early readings of stuff, especially when you haven't finished writing, because that tends to fall in the same process that I fell into, where somebody gives you an idea or gives you something that you're not going to have to go back and backtrack. So you have to be careful about how early you show your stuff. And that's why the only person that really gets to see my stuff is Wyatt when it's in the early stages, Now, what I've recently started to do is post my stuff up on Railroad, and if you check in my links down below, you'll see a description of my story, Intrepid, and I've put some chapters up for people to give me feedback on, just because I have written so much already, and I'm totally isolated, and I really want to feel connected to readers. Like, I'm not just writing this for myself. So I have gone and put stuff that is pretty much unedited and, like, fresh, like, completely... I mean, it's probably going to change. It already has changed. But I put it out there just because I'm anxious to build a connection with a group. So that's not the best thing to do. I'm not advocating that, even though, you know, it's one of those things of, you know, do as I say, not as I do. But I haven't really got a lot of feedback from it. So it's not really like it's hurting me. Okay. I need a second to, like, collect my brain. So I want to scroll through the chat here, and kudos to Timber for helping me out tonight. You have been awesome. I'm really, really happy you were my eyes in the chat tonight while I was rambling, so very cool. Thank you very much for that. Oh, Kit made it in. Hey, Kit. I'm so excited. Kit was one of my secret bonus viewers, so I'm really glad Kit made it. Thank you very much, and I did check out your stuff on Amazon. I do want you to know that I did that, so don't just think I was like, yeah, send me your stuff, and then, like, totally forgot about it. I totally checked that out, so thank you very much for sharing that with me. I hope you brought some stuff with you tonight to work on, and you can check out the links that I put down in the show notes. So at this point, my brain is totally befuddled. I've made it through all of my notes for the show. I feel like it's been a pretty productive and successful first episode. I'm ready to sit back. You guys want to ask me questions. If you want to just take the time to chat, that's fine. I don't want to think any harder than I have to right now. So I'm pretty much done at this point. If there's anything specific you guys want to ask me about, I will wait. I think it's pretty much just Timber and Kit at this point. But if you have something that you want to ask me, that's totally cool. I'll give you a couple seconds to pop it into the chat. Otherwise, I think I'm probably going to call it a night, because the meds that I had to take earlier on my trip to the pharmacy might be kicking in. And it's only 8:30 where I live, but I'm already getting pretty tired, and I feel a brain cloud sweeping in. So I'm probably not going to be making much sense for much longer. I think I'm going to say goodnight soon, finish my tea, and probably crawl into bed. So, yeah, it is. Trip to the pharmacy turning into a trip. That is exactly what it is. And they didn't even give me good stuff. I didn't get pain meds or anything like that. But they did say it might affect my sleep pattern. So I don't know if it's tweaking with me because my brain just doesn't want to brain today anymore, or if it's the meds I got at the pharmacy today. So, Kit, I don't know when you got in here, but if you can't tell, I've got a cold today. And that's on top of this other issue that I've been having medically. So it's just been like the perfect storm leading up to tonight's show. So, okay. I think that's it for me tonight. Please check out the show notes. Check out the links I put down here and do your research. Figure out your outline. Your homework for next week when we come back on Friday Night Writes is we're going to take our outlines and we're going to look at them to figure out what genre our story falls into. And I know that people watching this, just like the people that got all upset with me about outline, those are the same people that are like, genre. I don't write genre. I write stories. Okay, once again, your reader is going to be the one to decide that. Even if you choose not to fit into a genre, your reader will see genre in your book. And that will establish expectations, and then everything's going to hinge on meeting those expectations. And if you don't, they're not going to like your story. So next week, we're going to look at our outlines to look at genre, conventions, obligatory scenes, and hopefully that will lead us in the process of examining where we have holes and gaps in our outline and how those obligatory scenes and conventions can be used to fill those gaps. And once again, just punch writer's block right in space, because it doesn't exist in the first place. But having almost as if, I don't know what I'd call them, maybe like prompts. I think what I like about obligatory scenes is they're good prompt generators. And as much as I love writing prompts for fun, writing prompts are useless when you're trying to write a story that you've already generated the ideas for. So obligatory scenes are great for using as gap fillers for your scenes that you still need to put into a story. So Thank you everyone who tuned in tonight. Thank you for everybody watching this as a recorded show later. Thank you for anybody who followed me. Thank you for Timber for moderating. Thank you, Kit, for coming back. And thank you, Joe, for popping in. I really miss you, buddy. And one of these days we need to get you on the show. So that's all for me tonight. Thank you. Check out the links. Do your homework. Pop in on Tuesday when we're going to talk about some obstacles and how to overcome them for, I guess we'll use my current story. If you're watching this and you have a writing problem that you would like the group to try and suss out because your brain is exhausted trying to figure it out, another link down in my on my Twitch page, there's a submit button. That goes to a Google form that gives you the opportunity to talk a little bit about the writing obstacle you're having, the type of story you're writing, and what problem you're facing so we can kind of work on it together. We'll start that collaborative process. We'll get this community going. So if you are having a writing obstacle that you are at wit's end and just cannot figure out, go to the submit button, fill out the Google form. I'll see it in the responses, and maybe on a future show we can use it as an example that we can come together and work out. So that's all for me tonight. Thanks again for showing up. Happy Friday Night Writes.